Jaya Shriman Narayana. Jaya Shriman Narayana. Jaya Shriman Narayana. Om Hri Om. Very good. Namaste, everyone. It is absolutely wonderful being here with you again for our Monday weekly live stream satsanga. You know, it's interesting. I was having a very nice conversation with one of my students earlier today where we were actually discussing this live stream that was upcoming. This was a few hours ago. And it was interesting how I had described this as an online satsanga. And this student of mine said, actually, Acharyaji, that's exactly what it is. This is not just a live stream, it's a satsanga. And it is a very unique satsanga, of course, in that even though we're not physically together, spiritually we are. And that despite the fact that we're all in different parts of this world. You know, it's interesting, as I think people know, we have people in our audience from literally everywhere, from all the continents, from throughout the Americas, North America, South America, from Europe, from Asia, from literally everywhere, Australia, New Zealand, just so many different places throughout the world. But yet we are all here, we are all united with one purpose, and that is to spend this hour knowing about God. Hopefully even experiencing the presence of God. Because the truth of the matter is, the nature of true satsanga, the nature of truly discussing the Vedic scriptures, is that when you do this in a real way, it's not merely a lecture. It's not merely a discourse. It's not like going to some university or college and having a professor lecture at you about some obscure topic about the history of Indian religion, blah, blah, blah. No, that's not what we do. Even in how we discuss the scriptures, it is meant to be certainly something that will feed you intellectually and philosophically, absolutely. But more than this, it's meant to also be something experiential. Thus, when we delve deeply into the Vedic scriptures and talk about all these many concepts that we do indeed talk about each week, what this is also meant to do is, even with the very talk itself, it's meant to move you. And not emotionally. No, rather it's meant to quite literally give you the experience of God even in discussing the scriptures. And then what to speak of then you yourself, when this talk is over and when the live stream is over, practicing meditation and actual spiritual practice on your own. This is indeed a satsanga. It's something that is meant to inspire. It's something that's meant to empower. And this is what we do every single Monday now at 7 p.m. Central Time. So thank you all for being here, because you are indeed my family. And I truly mean that. You are my family, you are my friends, you are individuals who you are here with me as often as you can be, hopefully every week, every Monday. And this is what we do. It is a live stream satsanga. So with that, let's dive into what we're going to do today. And what we're going to be speaking about today, very specifically, are two verses from the Mundaka Upanishad, one of the more important of the Upanishads, one of the main Upanishads. And these two verses very specifically give a very beautiful image. Now I've spoken about these verses in the past, kind of in passing, but I want to delve very deeply into these verses now and into this concept of the two birds on one tree. That is the famous storyline that's given here. And of course, it's a metaphor. It's a metaphor for ourselves as an individual Atman, but then Paramatman, that is God. And as you saw by the title of this talk, this is precisely what these two verses are talking about. That is, what is Atman? This term that you've heard me use a million times, but which is there all throughout the Vedic scriptures. That is our individual self, our spirit, our consciousness. You know, there are many words that you can use. That is what is meant by Atman. But then, interestingly, in also the Upanishads, you find the word Atman in the Upanishads, but also in the Upanishads, you find this other word. And it's a different word. It's a distinct word, Paramatman. That is the supreme self. And unfortunately, of course, as I constantly say, today, meaning, in the last 150 years, roughly, unfortunately, there's been so much confusion about so many different topics, so many different terminology, so many terms, so many different words, Sanskrit words that are used in expressing Sanatana Dharma. There's been so much confusion to the point where even when it comes to these two, very straightforward, actually, if you look at the Sanskrit, and especially if you look at the Sanskrit within the proper context of the Upanishads, there has been so much confusion that it is truly amazing, to the point where very often people will do the truly intellectually simplistic, and it's simplistic, thing, and that is to conflate the two, and to say that, the individuals who wrote the Upanishads just weren't very intelligent, so they decided to use two different words for really what is the exact same thing. Well, those of us who know the Vedic scriptures know better, when the writers, the rishis, the writers of the Vedic scriptures, when these individuals use words, they use them with laser precision. And there is a reason why you hear these two completely separate terms, Atman versus Paramatman. And let me just lay this out before we even go into these verses, because these verses will make it crystal clear. But let me just lay this out and explain precisely what is meant by these two terms. Atman, again, means us, you, watching this right now as an individual unit of consciousness, you as a conscious being, as what Patanjali calls drashtur, that is an individual experiencer, a perceiver, an individual unit of consciousness. That is an individual who is finite, who presently is in illusion and ignorance, not knowing your true self and absolutely living as if you are not that true self due to that illusion. That's Atman, as Atman is presently constituted within the context of Maya, of illusion. Now, I know that was a mouthful, but that is the definition of Atman, individual unit of consciousness that is finite, that has as its source God. Now, there is the second term, Paramatman. Parama-Atman. Parama-Atman, Paramatman, when put together. This means the supreme self. And what this is referring to very specifically is God. God. And not the individual Atman. Rather, this is referring to that in which nothing greater can be conceived, that being who is the both material and spiritual, that being who is the possessor of an infinite number of auspicious attributes carried to an infinite degree. This is what is meant by Paramatman. So when we hear the word Paramatman, that is not referring to us. In other words, it's not referring to you. And if you think that is the case, you're in illusion. Indeed, this is why we are in illusion, because we have made the mistake of thinking we are God. So interesting, just as an aside, how, of course, this is one of the foundations of the silly New Age movement, and so many people who will say, oh yes, I am God, I am God, I am God, not understanding that that very anti-mantra itself is the very reason why we are in ignorance, is because we think we're God. You see, whenever you encounter evil individuals, even in the movies, some evil figure, some evil Bond villain who wants to take over the world, are they not convinced, really in a way, that they are God? And yet somehow New Age people seem to think that, no, this is actually spiritual, to say, I am God. Well, again, the Vedic scriptures make this extremely clear, that there is indeed our individual Atman, but then there is God. And we are dependent upon God. God is dependent upon nothing. So thus, this is the distinction between Atman and Paramatman, and this is why the Vedic scriptures have these two terms. It's not by accident. It's not meant to trick us. It's not metaphor. It's not this, that, or anything else. Rather, it's very, very clear that we are individual units of consciousness who have our source in our sustainer, who is God, Paramatman. And that Paramatman is indeed God, with everything that that term means. So now, understanding that distinction between Atman and Paramatman, let's dive deeply into these two verses from the Mundaka Upanishad. We'll do them one at a time. We'll begin with the first verse that we're going to look at. And this is Mundaka Upanishad 3:1:1. And I will read this now. Like two birds of golden plumage, inseparable companions, the individual self and the supreme self are perched on the branches of the self-same tree. The former tastes of the sweet and bitter fruits of the tree. The latter, tasting of neither, calmly observes. And that's the verse describing, again, Atman and Paramatman, using this metaphor of two birds. Now, let's go deeply into this. I'm sure some people who are here tonight have probably heard this before because it's quite famous. Many have not. And even for those who have heard it before, we will hopefully go rather deeply into this to explain what is truly the significance of, again, this metaphor that is given here. Well, first of all, again, there are two birds. There are two individuals. These are Atman and Paramatman. Let me go a little bit deeper into the nature of Paramatman. There was another live stream not long ago, several weeks ago, where indeed I talked very specifically about Paramatman realization and how Paramatman is referring certainly to God, but very specifically to a very specific aspect of God. And that is God as God is present within the heart of every living being. So as God is there present within the Hridaya, within the heart region, and living there with us, this is what is referred to as Paramatman. Now, this being the case, what is wonderful about this understanding of God as Paramatman is that first, God is indeed, as the Mundaka Upanishad itself says, God is indeed our constant companion. There is never a time when we are separated from God. Indeed, it is God's very presence there, situated beside our own consciousness, that gives us everything, that gives us sustenance, that gives us being itself. Indeed, our very being, our very existence, would not be a possibility unless God were present there with us as that constant companion. So this is what is really meant by Paramatman, not just God in the general sense, certainly that too. You can say Paramatman is God because that is true. But this is a very technical term for God. That means specifically God as God accompanies the individual Atman, as the individual Atman, especially within the material world, in its illusion, goes through all of its motions, all of its egoic motions within the material world, and thus producing good karma and bad karma due to making decisions based upon illusion, based upon egotism, based upon self-centeredness, etc. The individual Atman, of course, will go through the cycle of reincarnation, going from body to body to body, the Atman itself transcending all bodies, and the bodies themselves simply being like clothing, like temporary clothing. Right now I'm wearing this. I can change, put on something else. It doesn't really affect me. In the same way, the individual Atman will go from one body to another. It doesn't affect the individual Atman. But what is of importance is that as the Atman is going through this journey of reincarnation due to its own choices alone, what is wonderful is such is the nature of the grace and the mercy and the love of God, that God is our companion. God is following us, is with us as we go from birth to birth to birth. And it's an amazing thing. I've spoken about this before, and I often repeat this because it still amazes me to this day. Because if we understand what is the nature of any of us as individuals, as we, again, are reincarnating, what does this mean? Well, we know in some lifetimes we were nice people. In some lifetimes we were wonderful. In some lifetimes we were horrific, horrible. We did things that we would not even want to face again. We would be so embarrassed. We've done good things, bad things. We've been good people, bad people. We've had good behavior. We've had horrible, narcissistic behavior where we've abused others. And yet, despite that fact, God is our constant companion and never leaves us, never leaves our side, quite literally. That here within the Hridaya, within the heart region, we are situated as Atman, and standing right next to us, right there, is God with us at all times. So thus, this is what this verse is talking about. So the two birds are of golden plumage. What this means is both are of the nature of consciousness. Both Atman and Paramatman are both of the nature of consciousness, ontologically. However, there's distinction. There are inseparable companions, which we just spoke about. The individual self and the supreme self are perched on the branches of the self-same tree. Now, this is of importance as well. What is that tree? What is that tree? So you have these two birds. They are both of the nature of consciousness, but they're different. They're both situated on the branches of the same tree. What is that tree? That tree world. So thus, we find ourselves as an individual Atman here within this material world. That is the tree. Paramatman also is here with us, situated within this material world, because we are. So again, he is our constant companion. So we, being situated in this interesting place of materialism, God doesn't leave us. He's with us, even here, even now. So this is what this is saying. But now comes the important and very interesting distinction. The former, that is the individual Atman, tastes of the sweet and bitter fruits of the tree. So what does this mean? Well, we know what this means. It's quite clear, actually. We, as individual beings, we do our best to try to enjoy this tree, to try to enjoy this material world. We are selfish, we are self-centered, we are hedonistic. We care about our own pleasure. As much as we sometimes try to deny that fact, yes, most people tend to care about their own self-pleasure more than anything. That's why we pursue everything. That's why human beings pursue a career, a good job, an education, a spouse, possessions, money, all sorts of things that people attempt to enjoy. Well, again, this is a metaphor. So when this is saying that the Atman tastes of the bitter and of the sweet and bitter fruits of the tree, that is the Atman in illusion within the material world trying to enjoy, trying to take and take and take and take. And sometimes those fruits are indeed sweet. Sometimes we'll have moments of happiness, of pleasure, but sometimes it's bitter. Sometimes we'll have the opposite. Sometimes we'll have tremendous suffering. And it goes back and forth and back and forth. And such is the nature of this material world, that we cannot create a perfect paradise here, because the nature of the world is such that it is like the winter and summer seasons, that they come and they go of their own accord. In the same way, happiness and distress, they come of their own accord. We think, oh, I've achieved it now, I have what I wanted, and something bad happens. But then, on the contrary, when it seems like, oh my God, my life could not be any worse, now suddenly things turn around and they get better again. So this is a world in which, due to our own choices, our own karma, etc., sometimes there are sweet fruits, sometimes there are bitter fruits. But this is what the Atman is doing. The Atman, in its illusion, not understanding that true happiness lies within, that true happiness lies in knowing God and surrendering to God with devotion, not understanding that, The individual Atman tries its best to enjoy the things of this world. Now that's us, the individual Atman. Now it goes on. The latter, that is, the Paramatman, tasting of neither, calmly observes. So, what is of significance here are several things. First of all, again, it is interesting that the Mundaka Upanishad could not be any clearer. The two birds are not the same. The two birds are not the same. And this could not be any clearer. So thus, individuals who try to interpret the Vedic scriptures, who try to warp the meaning of the Vedic scriptures into thinking that, oh yes, the individual self and the supreme self are exactly the same, i.e., we are God, God is us, etc. There's no distinction whatsoever. Well, the Mundaka Upanishad would very much disagree with you. A very clear distinction is made here, that one is an illusion, the other is not. One is trying to enjoy in its illusion the fruits of this world, the other is not. The other is doing what? Calmly observing. That's God. That is God. God is the calm observer. We are not God. We're not calm. We're trying to enjoy selfishly. But God is doing the opposite. He doesn't care for the fruits of this world. He is the source of the fruits. He is the source of the fruits. He is the master of the fruits. He is the master of all things. Thus, the greatest wealth, the greatest attainment that one can have within the entire context of the cosmos is like nothing to God. And such is the nature of God. What does he do instead? He calmly observes what we are doing. Now, this is the thing that is, again, truly wonderful about this. If you can envision this. Why is God calmly observing? Well, first of all, because God, of course, is eternally situated in wisdom and in truth. So God is not enamored by any of the fruits that he sees us trying to eat so furiously. He couldn't care less, but more. He is watching because he is allowing us, in his love, to make our own decisions. God gives us freedom. Thus, he is observing us lovingly, like a loving parent, in a way. Observing us as we make our decisions, sometimes good, sometimes bad. Not intervening, trying to scold us, trying to chastise us. No. Rather, what is God doing in the form of Paramatman? Waiting with infinite patience, with eternal patience if necessary, waiting for us to stop trying to eat the fruits so furiously, so passionately, and realize that we're not alone. Realize that all this time that we've been trying to enjoy, eat of this material world, realizing finally there's someone else with me who's been with me all along and who is indeed my constant companion, who has always been there at all times. And all this time I've ignored him. All this time I've been barely even aware of his presence. Once in a while I get a little glimpse that, oh, maybe I'm not alone. Maybe there's someone who's there with me. But for the most part, ignoring the fact that my best friend is there and has been waiting for me lovingly, waiting for me to turn around and realize I'm not alone. How many times did I feel alone in this world? How many times did I feel abandoned? Did I feel like there was no one who loved me? Not realizing all I needed to do, and it was up to us. We simply needed to turn around and realize God was there the entire time. So this is a truly, truly beautiful metaphor in which it explains what is the foundation also of Vedanta. What is the foundation of Vedanta? In Vedanta, there are three elements. There are three ontological reals. There is Atman, there is Brahman, there is God, and then there is Jagat, there is materiality. And all three are spoken of here. That individual Atman, that is Atman itself. That's the individual unit of consciousness. This beautiful bird who is not enamored by anything but is simply our constant companion. That's Brahman, that's Bhagavan, that's Narayana. That is God. And then finally, the tree, the material world, that is Jagat, what is called Jagat. in Vedanta. So thus, this is a supremely Vedantic verse. So, all that being said, let's go to the second verse, the verse that proceeds immediately after this, because it's also quite important, quite beautiful. We won't spend quite as much time with the second verse. First, because it's not necessary to, but also due to time. I want to give people an opportunity to ask some questions. So this is now the next verse, which is Mundaka Upanishad 3:1, and then verse 2. In the self-same tree, the individual bird is drowned in grief because of delusion and impotency. When it beholds the other bird, that is, the adorable Lord, who is glorious, he becomes freed from sorrow. So again, beautiful conclusion to what was said previously in the previous verse. So again, somewhat quickly, let's go through this a little bit. So again, you'll see that in this verse, it makes this very clear distinction. Atman is not the same as Paramatman. They're not synonymous. They're not the same person. These two verses could not make it any clearer in any way whatsoever. Because again, one of the birds is an illusion. The other not only is not an illusion, but deeper. This verse explains that it is by the first bird turning to the second bird in surrender that second bird affords liberation upon the first. So let's go through this again somewhat quickly. First of all, in the self-same tree, that individual bird, that is the Atman, is drowned in grief because of delusion and impotency. Yes, that's what we are experiencing. Not all of us, and we're experiencing this to different degrees. For some people, we have a pretty nice life. You know, we're not necessarily consciously in grief. For many of us, for many individuals, yes, we are in grief. So many individuals have experienced tremendous grief throughout their life. And why? Because of delusion and impotency. Because of delusion meaning, of course, again, not knowing our true spiritual self, and impotency, not having the ability to do, not having that empowerment to do what is good, to do what we know we should be doing. And why? Because of that delusion. So this is where most people in the world, sadly, very sadly, find themselves. And it's very sad. This is why we need spirituality. This is why we need to indeed not have just spirituality for ourselves. This is why the world needs this message that you're hearing right now of Sanatana Dharma. Is because how many hundreds of millions, if not billions, of individuals right now are experiencing precisely what this verse just said, grief. In their delusion, grief. Thus it is up to us in any way that we can to help them. And if you feel you don't have the power to help them yourself, well then please help us to help them. Help the International Sanatana Dharma Society. We are doing our best on a mass scale to help people to be relieved from this grief. Help us to do that. But this is the task of today, because this describes so many people. When it, that is, when the individual Atman, beholds the other bird, that is, Paramatman, God. That is, and now this verse qualifies, who is that other bird? You see, now this verse, again, makes this clear. That other bird, that is the adorable Lord, who is glorious. So thus, again, this verse is speaking about God when it's talking about that second bird. When he does that, he becomes freed from sorrow. Thus, it is again when we as individual Atman turn to Paramatman, when we turn to God, when we recognize God, when we recognize this constant companion that is there with us, this adorable Lord who is supremely glorious, and we surrender to that Lord, that finally we have freedom from grief, we have freedom from sorrow. All of our pains are gone, and we now know true joy, and we never feel alone again. Thus, this is the purport of these two truly beautiful verses, and this, again, somewhat well-known story of the two birds on the tree. And hopefully this explains what these two verses are truly all about. With that, I want to thank you very much for listening to my very brief discourse. As you know, I could have spoken about these two verses for an infinite almost amount of time longer, but I do want to leave some time for questions and answers. We're about at the halfway mark. So with that, let me signal to everybody that indeed, if you want to ask any questions either about these two verses, or truthfully it can be about any aspect of Sanatana Dharma, this is your time. I don't want to dictate what you should ask about. But again, as long as it is about Vedic spirituality, please feel free to do so and to begin asking any questions. And at that point, I will be happy to answer. I will answer this and somewhat briefly. Namaste Acharyaji, is the Srivishnu Sahasranama considered as important as the Bhagavad-Gita? Some people say that it is more important, a Vedic scripture, than the Gita, as it comes later in the Mahabharata. No, it is equal but different. It is equal but different. And of course, in importance, using the word importance, what is of importance is what you mean by that term, what that term actually means. The Srivishnu Sahasranama versus Bhagavad-Gita are doing different things. So thus, again, to say which is of more quote-unquote importance, it's quite literally comparing like apples to cars. not even apples to oranges, apples to cars. They're doing two radically different things. The Sri Vishnu Sahasranama are the 1,000 names of Vishnu or Narayana, and this is something that is meant to teach us many of the different eternal attributes of God, to reveal many of the names, the divine names of God, etc., versus the Bhagavad Gita, which is more overtly philosophical and which has as its literary mission the teaching of the summation of the Vedic scriptures, and specifically the Vedanta of the Upanishads, to modern human beings within the context of the Kali Yuga. So thus, to say one is more important than the other, again, you can't really say that, because they're doing radically different things. They are both important. They are both scripture. And which came later, first, that's of no importance. If anyone knows anything about Vedic scriptures, be expressing things in a linear sort of way, A leading to B, leading to C, leading to D, etc., is not a factor of any great importance in the Vedic scriptures whatsoever. So I hope that answers the question. Here's an important, very practical question that I would like to answer, because I really think it probably applies to many, many people today. And this is SK who is asking this. Namaste, Shri Acharyaji. Apologies if you've spoken of this before. You'd never have to apologize. But I would like to know some useful exercising for realizing Atman and or relinquishing addiction. Very nice. Yes, these are two separate things, and but I will answer these, and it's especially the relinquishing addiction that I would like to talk about. But I'll answer both of these. First of all, as far as useful exercises for realizing Atman, well, of course, spiritually speaking, one very powerful way that is traditional, that is used actually, it's even called the neti process. This is used in the Upanishads. One very effective way of understanding a spiritual positive is to first understand its negative. That is what in Latin is called a via negativa. That is, you want to understand what X thing is, understand what it is not. You see. So this is one exercise that is actually done in the Upanishads, where if you wish to understand what is Atman, well, first begin with understanding what Atman is not. And not just in the most obvious sort of ways, well, what is my Atman? Well, it's not that car that just drove by. Not silly, obvious ways, but ways that are more personal and that deal specifically with our illusions. So thus, when we falsely identify with that which is not, well, what do? We are identifying with that which we think is very close to us and which we even think is ourself, but which in reality is not. So thus, for example, our name. Our name is something that's very personal to us, but are we our name? Well, of course not. See, this is a process of self-analysis, coming to the goal of self-realization via the process of healthy spiritual self-analysis. And that is asking, well, am I this name? I'm using this name. The name was given to me, but I easily could have been given another name by my parents. A name is arbitrary. I can change my name. I can legally change my name. I can have a nickname, etc. So I'm not my name. Am I the body? Well, the body is constantly going through flux and change, and what my body looked like now, it didn't look like when I was 5, when I was 1, etc. And in this way, through a process of via negativa, of negation, beginning by understanding I am, again, neti, neti, neti. Not this, not this, not this. Now, when we go through this process, what we will find is that we do not come to the point where when we've negated everything that we are not, we don't come to the point of nothingness. That's a lie. And anyone who tells you that knows nothing about spirituality. That's a type of comic book spirituality, maybe. No. What you find when you negate that which you are not is that there is indeed something that is there, and that is the true you. That is you as, again, what Patanjali calls drashtur, that is the experiencer, that being who is there within, who has experienced all these things, who has experienced the mind, experienced the body, experienced the false persona, the false identities, etc., identities, plural. And now you have come to that experiencer, that is the true self, that is the Atman. And now, having achieved that, now there's the via positiva, the positive pact, the positive path in which now you can begin to explore what you truly are as Atman. So I hope that was helpful with that. The other thing I want to talk about is what you asked about, relinquishing addiction. And this is an extremely important topic today. I have a very soft place in my heart for individuals who have experienced addictions. And let me be honest with you, I never have. I've never been addicted to anything whatsoever, anything, alcohol, drugs, anything you can think of. That doesn't mean, however, that I don't understand addiction, because I have tried to help many people who indeed have had serious addictions to all sorts of different things, different substances, behaviors, etc. And I have a very soft place in my heart for individuals who indeed struggle with such addictions. And one of the reasons why is because, sadly, we live in a society that encourages addictions. Rather than trying to liberate us from addictions, indeed, our society encourages people to do drugs, to drink alcohol, go to bars, etc., etc. That has become the norm in our culture, which is horrific. I always have to remind people, I'm slightly older than most of my disciples, and I have to remind them that no, there was a time when I was a child that bar culture was just for lowlifes. Now it's become the norm, where if you're a normal human being, you float from one bar to another, to another, to another. That was not always the culture. Again, 40 years ago, it simply was not the case. But now it is. Now it's encouraged. So one thing that I would say is that the best way to help yourself with addiction, and of course I apologize, I can't go very deeply into this, but hopefully the few words I'll give you will be helpful. The first thing is to understand why indeed you are addicted to these experiences. Because they are experiences. They are both negative and positive experiences. They are negative in that they are experiences that are dulling you from the hurt of this world, the grief of this world, as this verse just said. But then also, they are giving you some sort of experience. It's an illusory experience. It's a temporary experience. It's an experience that ultimately is going to harm you, but at least it's an experience. And for so many individuals who find themselves in this crazy, interesting world, they are reaching out to God, but they just don't know how. And in the meantime, in the interim, what will they do? Reach out for any experience that they can that will give them at least a facsimile of transcendence. That's why people get high. That's why people get drunk, because they are experiencing at the very least a facsimile, even if it's fake. It kind of reminds them of some feeling of transcendence. Well, first of all, it's important to understand this. What is indeed the nature of addiction? Why people are addicted to things? And then finally, how do we transcend addictions? And again, I'm sorry to state this in so succinct a way. I do want to get to other people's questions, but let me just say, by turning to the real, by understanding that, no, you don't need to dull yourself from the pains of this world. Rather, you can transcend the pains of this world. No, you don't have to have a facsimile of ecstasy, a facsimile of transcendent experience. You can have the real thing by indeed truly turning to God, truly turning to spirituality. You want to rid yourself of an addiction? Hurl yourself, mind, body, emotions, spirit, everything that you are, into spirituality. And replace those addictions with true experience that will be ecstatic, but that will be healthy, but that will be real, that will be permanent and lasting. And again, I apologize for this being a somewhat short answer, but that is the answer. That is the answer. Turn to God. And let me just say one more thing to not keep that too vague, because I don't like vague things. That means practice Sanatana Dharma. Hurl yourself into practicing Sanatana Dharma. That means read every single thing of legitimate value, not New Age gurus. Put garbage aside. Read my books. Read the actual scriptures. Read the books of A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada. Read real things. Practice puja. Practice meditation. Do yoga. Do yoga. Do yoga. Do healthy things spiritually such that the addiction will be left behind like it was just a bad dream that you just leave behind. So I hope that was helpful. With the time that we have about 15 more minutes. Let me see some of these other questions. Very good. Going to skip a few questions only because some of these questions, sadly, they would take half an hour to answer. So I can't answer a question for half an hour because we don't. But let me perhaps answer this one. John Fortuna. Namaste, Sri Acharya-ji. I am wondering if it is appropriate to pray to Krishna for absolute knowledge regarding the origin of God and the origin of the cosmos. It's always good to pray to Krishna for every positive thing. That being said, however, I have to tell you, God does not have an origin. God, in fact, is recognized in all theistic traditions, interestingly, but especially in Sanatana Dharma, as that source of all things, which itself has no source. In fact, the technical term, philosophically, the technical Sanskritic term for this concept is karana, karanam. That is the causeless cause. That being who is the cause of all things, but which in turn has no cause. That is God. So God does not have an origin. As far as the origin of the cosmos is eternal. However, it also goes through eternal cycles of coming into being being maintained for some time, and then dissolution, but then again coming into being, etc. So that cycle is eternal. So I can I can answer that question for you pretty succinctly. But yes, always pray to Krishna for all positive things. Never hesitate to turn to him. Namaste, Guru. Do animals and plants have Atman as well? Yeah, that's a good question. Absolutely. Absolutely. Animals, plants, essentially anything that is alive. In fact, let me explain this concept, which is actually a very easy concept to understand, and yet sadly, which so many people seem to be so confused about. Interestingly, though at one time in ancient history, people just understood this, regardless of the culture. Today, a lot of people have difficulty understanding this. Very simply, within the context of the material world, you have that which is sentient, that which is insentient. You have that which is alive versus that which is not. And that being the case, anything that is alive because it has consciousness. There's no such thing as living matter. That is a modern atheistic demonic concept. That here's just a neutral pen. Here's a thing, and it is made of matter, but somehow it comes to life. It doesn't have a soul, it doesn't have consciousness, but now it can converse with me, and I can have conversations with it, and it can choose to do different things, and now it wants to eat, etc., etc., but it's still pure matter, and there's no life or consciousness within it. There is no such thing. It's either consciousness or it's not. In the case of this particular pen, it is insentient. It is materiality. Now, anything that is indeed alive, whether it is an insect, whether it is a plant, whether it is a dog, whether it is an elephant, whether it is a human being, whether it is a demon, whether it is a god, whether it is a god that lives to be 1,000,000 years old. What unites all of these living beings is that the reason why they are alive, and why you can even say that is alive, is because what gives it life is indeed consciousness. Consciousness is Atman. Atman and consciousness are synonymous. Thus, yes, if we see anything that's alive, that's an Atman. If we see a mosquito flying by, there is an Atman that is in that being who has desires, who has will, etc. And again, whether it's a mosquito or a god, it is consciousness. So, yes, I hope that answers that question. Let's go a little bit more. Thank you. This talk somehow of Swami Prabhupada. I am humbled beyond words for you to even say that. I am not worthy of even touching Prabhupada's shoes. But thank you. Is the Maha Mantra a good mantra to use, and when to use? Very nice question. Yes, let me answer this, and I've had this question many times in different contexts. What you mean by the Maha Mantra, because there is no such term in the Vedic scriptures actually, but I know what you mean is the Hare Krishna mantra. That is, as it has been taught in Gaudiya Vaishnavism for the past roughly 300 years or so. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. So the Hare Krishna mantra, without going very in depth, because those disciples of mine who used to be with ISKCON and are not anymore, who are now my disciples, they know I can talk about this topic for easily a few hours. Let me just say, these are the names of God. These are the names of Krishna. So certainly if you choose to recite and to meditate upon, not just chant, but meditate upon the Hare Krishna mantra, the names of Krishna, you will have supreme benefit. And indeed, if with initiation from a legitimate guru, If you indeed have this as your primary sadhana and you choose to meditate on the names of Krishna in the form of the Hare Krishna mantra, you can indeed achieve liberation. So I hope that answers that question. Oh, also you ask when to use. If you can, 24 hours a day. There's no maximal limit. Here's an interesting question. Should one follow Hatha Yoga exclusively or combine it with reading the Bhagavad-Gita? Yes, good question. And by Hatha Yoga, I assume that what you mean very specifically are the asanas. Yeah, I won't go very deeply into explaining what is the distinction, because there is a distinction between Hatha Yoga versus asanas versus the Patanjala yoga system, that is the yoga system of Patanjali. I'm not going to go very in depth into the distinctions because I can, but due to lack of time, I won't. Let me just say that if indeed you are practicing, especially the physical aspects of yoga, i.e. asanas or asana vinyasa, then true yoga, including the practice of the asanas, is meant to be done with devotion and with the goal of indeed knowing God. So thus, yes, as far as the Bhagavad-Gita is the yoga text par excellence. See, it's interesting. A lot of people who, just they're innocent. They haven't studied this very deeply. A lot of people think that the Yoga Sutras is, let's say, the primary text on yoga. It's not. And anyone who knows the Vedic scriptures knows this. It's actually Bhagavad-Gita. The Bhagavad-Gita is a yoga text. The entire Bhagavad-Gita, all 18 chapters from the beginning to the end, is speaking about yoga. But of course, yoga in the true sense, that is, philosophically, spiritually, and using yoga with the goal of knowing God, of achieving liberation from the world, etc. So as far as combining what you're calling Hatha Yoga with the Bhagavad-Gita, yes. Unless you combine any form of yoga with the actual teachings of the Bhagavad-Gita, and yes, the Yoga Sutras and the Upanishads, etc., then you're not actually practicing yoga. It's just empty. Rather, if you're going to practice yoga, you must do so for spiritual reasons. And that is doing yoga indeed with devotion toward God. Very nice. Ask, what does Acharyaji think of the legends of Shambhala? Is it true that this nation did exist? Does it still exist? All right, I'm going to give you a little bit of homework, because in some previous videos, and I'll give you a little hint, in some Discord interviews that I did, I spoke somewhat in depth about Shambhala, and I'm going to give you a little bit of research assignment. Hunt for those videos, look for those videos, and you'll have the answer there. But short answer, yes, Shambhala was real, and is real, and it exists today. All right. Dare I answer one more question? Let us see what the time we have. This is a very interesting question that I'm going to answer as probably the last question. I like this question because the intuition with which you ask this question is quite good, actually, and that is this. Good evening, sir. Just a trivial question, and as I just said, it's actually not trivial. It's a good question. If the Bhagavad Gita is for the Kali Yuga, will anything happen to it after the Kali Yuga in 400,000 years from now? Excellent question. Interestingly, in a way, Krishna himself within the Bhagavad Gita kind of addresses this. And what he says is that indeed this knowledge that he explained in the Bhagavad Gita, it was known before he even spoke it 5,100 years ago or so. But what happens is this knowledge is revealed, but then after some time, after many generations go by, it's lost. Again, Krishna himself explains this process. And then it has to be explained again. But then after a long period of time, again, it's lost. And this has to be repeated again and again. Such is the nature of the material world, that memory and corruption conspire against truth. False memory, forgetfulness, and delusion and corruption conspire against truth. So eventually, sadly, what we have as the Bhagavad-Gita, it's pretty much guaranteed in time, when, nobody knows, 10,000 years, 100,000, whenever, it will eventually be lost and have to be re-revealed again. So it's actually a very good question. With that, I very much apologize that I can't take any more questions. I'm going to have to end here because we only have 3 minutes, and I just have a few things that I need to tell you before our time is over for this evening. First of all, just to let you know, sadly, next Monday, just due to a scheduling conflict, we will not be able to have our Monday satsanga, and I apologize for that. Again, a scheduling conflict, and I will not be able to do the satsanga this coming Monday, a week from today. However, we will resume after that, which will be Monday, August 10th. And please be here Monday, August 10th, as we resume. When we do resume on that Monday, especially, please try to be here. So again, August 10th, Monday, August 10th at 7 p.m. Central Time, because in addition to having our regular satsanga, I'm going to have some very special announcements, some interesting things I want to share with people, some very positive developments regarding the International Sanatana Dharma Society. So especially try to be here for that, please. Then finally, I'm going to wrap up with what I usually tell people, and I'm sorry that this is repetitive, but it's important because, again, we have a mission to indeed save the world. What we want is that these teachings that I'm sharing with you, these teachings of Sanatana Dharma, of the Vedic scriptures, that they be shared not just with the few thousand people who are here, which of course is wonderful, but we want this message to be known by multiple hundreds of millions in time. So that being the case, please help us. Please subscribe to this channel, and when you subscribe, hopefully if YouTube is doing its job, which often it doesn't, you should get notifications whenever videos are released, etc. But please subscribe and ask for the notifications. I believe you have to click onto some bell or something, so please do that. The other thing is, when you have a chance, please visit our website, dharmacentral.com. This is a very special website. It's a website that we've had for a long time, 22 years, since 1998. And if you come to dharmacentral.com, you will have access to a lot more information about this path, including my books that are available there. We have a beautiful mantra CD that we have that a lot of people don't even know about. It's very beautifully, professionally produced by one of my disciples who is a retired master musician, but it's myself reciting many, many, many mantras from the Vedic scriptures in a very beautiful meditative sort of way. So if you go to dharmacentral.com, you'll see that there. When you're there at dharmacentral.com, please sign up to our email list, and you'll see that immediately available. You can just sign up, and in that way, you'll get notifications periodically, very periodically. It's only once in a while, probably sometimes not even once a month, but you'll get notifications about different announcements of the International Sanatana Dharma Society. And the last thing is this. If you feel inspired to do so, please become an official tithing member of the International Sanatana Dharma Society. This organization, the ISDS, it is a movement, but it is a non-profit spiritual movement, truly. It's not a business. It's not anything else that you can imagine. It is truly a non-profit. It's recognized by the IRS as a 501c3. So the money that you donate goes to the non-profit. So please consider becoming a monthly tithing member for any amount that you can. And if you truly are finding yourself in financial hardship right now because of all the things happening with coronavirus, etc., please don't worry about it. But if you're in a position to help, please do so. Please become a member, and you can get that information again at dharmacentral.com. You just go there, you look on the menu, and you'll see membership there. I believe it's in one of the sub-menus, but you'll find it within seconds if you look for it on the menu. Please consider becoming a member, and in that way, helping us with all the many, many, many projects that we are engaged in to restore Sanatana Dharma to the world. And with that, I thank you again very much for spending your time with me. I thank you for your questions. I thank the moderators for helping in so many ways, helping to also answer people's questions, etc. I could never do this without the help of many, many moderators and people behind the scenes who we have. So I thank all of you for your volunteer work. And with that, again, sadly, we won't meet next Monday, but the Monday after. And I look forward to being with you again then and having many, many more wonderful questions from you. With that, for the next 2 weeks, between now and then, please do everything you need to take very good care of yourself in every way. Stay safe, stay happy, especially stay spiritual. So with that, namaste. Jaya Shriman Narayana. Jaya Bhagavan Shri Krishna. Jaya Shri Guru. Sanatana Dharma Jayate. May Sanatana Dharma be always victorious. And with that, please take care.